Now, I do want to talk about that review which yesterday was released. It found that Victoria's childcare system had been putting profits and privacy ahead of children's safety, leaving predators unchecked. It's a dreadful, dreadful situation. The Allen government has pledged to accept 22 reforms, including a new regulator and tougher working with children checks. I just wonder if that's actually going to be enough. Joining us to discuss is the Shadow Education Minister, Jess Wilson. Thank you very much for your time. Why did it take such horrendous alleged incidents for Labor to actually take action on this issue? I'm sure that people were telling them that the system was broken.
Well, good to be with you, Steve, and you're spot on. The government was warned 3 years ago by the Ombudsman that Victoria's working with children check system was broken, and they failed to listen to the Ombudsman's recommendations to implement those reforms. They didn't even have the decency to respond to the Ombudsman's recommendations. And 3 years later, we are now seeing the consequences, with children's safety being put at risk in childcare centres right around the state. The Premier has failed to take the action needed, the urgent action needed, since these horrific allegations. The review that was released yesterday doesn't provide any great new ideas. It actually just highlights the fact that we knew what needed to be done. We've been speaking for weeks about the need for these reforms. We didn't need to wait for a review, and the Premier should have acted well before now.
What's the key reform, Jess, that is attached to the working with children permits? What are they going to do that they should have already done ages ago?
Well, what the Ombudsman recommended 3 years ago was that the decision maker, when it comes to rejecting or revoking a working with children check, should be able to take in any risk information, any information that they think puts a child at risk, and be able to consider that as part of the working with children check clearance system. At the moment, it only is allowed to take into consideration a police charge or a police conviction, and so it broadens that out. It also would allow the immediate revocation of a working with children check. And at the moment, Steve, we've got a situation in Victoria where an individual who was dismissed from a childcare centre for sexual misconduct, for grooming toddlers, continues to hold an active working with children check in this state because the government has failed to take action. Now, a couple of weeks ago in the Parliament, the Victorian Liberals and Nationals brought new laws to the floor of the Parliament that would have fully implemented the Ombudsman's recommendations. It would have linked the working with children check to the police database. And the government, the Premier and all of her ministers and MPs voted down that legislation. It's simply unacceptable, and it truly demonstrates that the Premier is refusing to put children's safety first.
Has she apologised to the parents of those children that have had to undergo those tests because of the predators that have been allowed to get into childcare?
Well, the Premier has failed to take the leadership that this state needed. And you're right, my heart breaks for those parents who had to take their babies, their toddlers, to go and get tested for sexually transmitted diseases. It is absolutely horrific, and it is a result of the Premier not taking the urgent action that was needed at the time. The Premier's actually tried to say that it wasn't her responsibility, that she wasn't a key decision maker 3 years ago. But I'm sorry, Steve, she was the Deputy Premier, and they've had 3 years since then to act. They could have acted 3 weeks ago when we took these laws to the floor of the Parliament. But what did the Premier do? She voted them down. We should be doing everything we possibly can to put children's safety first, working constructively together, the opposition and the government. And that has been our offer at every point in time, is let's put politics aside and put children's safety first.
The Premier had former South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill do this report, and we mentioned there the childcare system, which is largely run by private profit organisation, private companies. What's going to change in that space, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, the review actually has a number of recommendations. About half the recommendations are directed towards the Commonwealth Government. And so in a large part, the Victorian Government and the Premier are handballing a lot of the responsibility to the Commonwealth rather than actually taking control of what the situation here is in Victoria. And so we do need to have a look at the system as a whole. But my interest, Steve, and my job as a Shadow Education Minister is to ensure that we are doing everything we can here in Victoria to keep children safe. And an example of that in the review is handballing to the Commonwealth the idea of installing CCTV in childcare centres. Now, we know that CCTV can act as a deterrent. We know from the police that it's incredibly important that, God forbid, the worst does happen, that they then have information and they can access that footage. And of course we need to put the appropriate safeguards around that footage and that data. But the Victorian government has decided that they're going to handball that to the federal government rather than taking the lead on it in the state, unlike the New South Wales government, which is in the process now of installing CCTV in childcare centres.
Yeah, incompetency. Good on you.